In this lecture, we're going to look at XMLListModel, the component that allows you to parse data in an XML file and feed it to your views in Qt. This component has a few properties that you need to be aware of. The source property allows you to link to an XML file that is going to provide the data. The query property allows you to specify the data that you want to extract from the XML file. The rows property allows you to specify the attributes that you want in the row that you queried from the query property, and the status property updates you on the status of loading your data. So if there is an error, if the loading is successful, you can know that from the status property here. And down here, you see an example of how you can link to an XML file. The XML file can be local, living in a resource file, and you can link to it using QRC like this, or you can get the XML data from the internet using some XML APIs. Here we have an example of an XML file and an XML list model that is going to read data from this XML file. Okay, we specified the source to be an XML file that is located in the resource file in our Qt project. The query property allows you to specify what you want, what is going to be your row in your XML file. In this case, we want to retrieve all the courses. Okay, you see we have a tag for courses, and inside we have a bunch of courses, and each course has child elements, instructor, year, and course name here. So we specified that we want to get courses in this query property that is in the XML list model. Now that we have a course, we may want to fetch further data from the course. For example, we may want to get this hot attribute here. We may also want to read the elements that are children to this course element here. That's where these XML rows come in. The first one here is reading this instructor element. You specify the role for whatever it is you are trying to read, and you pass in a query that fetches what you want. Okay, we want to get the instructor. This instructor here has to match the tag that you have in your course element here. And you pass in a method that denotes the data type that you want to read that piece of data as. We want to read this as a string in this case. We also want to read year. It really is the same thing, but we want to read that as a number. And in the third one, we want to read the course name here. We want to read that as a string. In the fourth XML role here, we want to read this hot attribute here. And this @ symbol here specifies that what you want to read is an attribute. It is not an element. And if you want to read an element, you just pass it in like this. All this gibberish that I am typing here to fetch data is really specified in a standard that is called XPath. It is a standard that allows you to parse an XML file to get specific pieces of data that you are interested in. And that's what we are exactly doing here, reading the XML file to fetch these elements or attributes here. And in this case, we want to feed that data to an XML list model. I hope this makes sense. If this is not clear yet, we're going to run an example in a moment, and you're going to understand how this works. Okay, we just looked at an overall example of how you read the data from your XML file and feed it to the XML list model. Now we want to focus on the syntaxes that you can use to pass this query here, the query that is in the XML list model. Notice that we have two queries. One is this one in the XML list model, and the other is this query that is inside the XML role here. We're going to focus on this one, the first one. Okay, these are different things you can do to read the data. You can specify that you want to read a course by passing a slash and passing the path that leads to the tag that you want to read. For example, here, courses, course, we specify that we want to read the course. You can pass in double slashes here and specify the tag name for whatever it is you want to read. This is also going to be equivalent to the first syntax here. You can also pass in the @ symbol to specify that you want to read an attribute. You can also specify that you want to read the first course, okay? When we fetch courses here, we get all the courses that are in the XML file, but you can say that you want to get the first course, and you can do that like this. If you are a C or C++ programmer or any language that is based on C, you know that arrays start at 0. This is going to tip you off because these indexes start at 1, and you need to be careful about that. Now we want to look at a few examples. Okay, we have the example here. It is the same file we had. You can pass the query to read all the courses. You can pass in another query that is going to read all the courses. The double slash notation here. You can pass this array notation to specify the element that you want. You can fetch all the courses that have the hot attribute. You can fetch the courses that have the hot attribute and the required attribute if you happen to have that. You can also query the courses that have the hot attribute or the required attribute. Okay, you can do all these operations. The next thing we want to look at is the syntax that you use in your XML roles to specify the data that you want to get in each course. Okay, to repeat, you can get the attribute or you can get the elements inside here. To read the elements, you pass in the name of the element that you want to read. Okay, so if we want to read instructor here, we just pass in instructor here and we specify the data type for whatever we want to read. If you want to read an attribute, you pass in the @ symbol here, and you also specify the data type that you want to read this as, and it is the same for the year. We want to read this as a number. Now we want to go to Qt Creator, create a project, and play with us. Okay, here we are in Qt Creator. We're going to create our project. It's a Qt Quick application. We call it XMLListModel demo. Choose our Qt version. Choose our kit and finish. We want to change the title here and specify what we are doing. The first thing we want to do, we want to specify the XML file that we want to read. So we're going to add a resource file that is going to point to that XML file. Hit resources here, add new, choose Qt resource file. I want to name this resource. We have done this quite a lot by now. I want to add a prefix. Take this out, hit enter. Now we want to go where we have saved this main QML file. You right click on it, choose show in Explorer. It's going to open that location in a moment. Here we are. Add a new folder, call it XML. I want to open this XML folder and paste in a file that I have prepared. This is basically the same XML file you have seen in the slides. I am going to go back to my project, add files to my resource file, choose this file here, and I can save it because it is now in my resource.qrc file. I can double click it to show it in Qt Creator, and you see that it is the same file. We have our courses inside, and you see that we have instructor, year, and course name. Now we can go back to main QML. I want to define my XML list model. I give it an ID. I want to give it a source property, and it is going to specify the location of my XML file. I want to use a local file, so I'm going to say qrc 3 slashes, say the folder where the file is located, and say the name of the file. It's called employees.xml. You can also specify a remote file using HTTP, just like an API, to fetch some XML data from the internet. I flagged this here so that you know. We're not going to do that in this lecture, but if you have an API that gives you an XML file, you can just stuff in the HTTP URL to the XML file, and it is just going to work. You just need to pass in the correct queries to fetch your XML data. Now we want to pass in our query property. So we're going to say query here, and we are going to say courses, course, because that's what we want to get from the XML file here. We want to read all these courses, and you pass in a query like this to get it. This is one way to do it. When we have run the application, I am going to show you the other syntaxes so that you can play with them. Okay, now I want to pass in my XML roles to parse the data that I want to read in each item that is returned by this query here that we did. This query is going to return the list of all the courses that we have in here, and we need to be able to read the data from each course that we have. This is the purpose of this XML role here. I want to pass in the name attribute, and it's going to be instructor, because this is what I want to read. And I'm going to pass in the query property, and here I am going to say instructor. We have sent this, and it's going to be a string. This is what I want to read it as. The first thing here specifies the role that this is going to be available as. So if I want to use this data in a delegate, for example, I am going to use the name that I have here as is. It doesn't have to be like what we have here in the XML file, but what we have here in the query has to match exactly what we have in here for us to be able to read the data. So we have instructor here. We should copy this and come here and make sure that we also have instructor here. This has to match the XML file. This has to match what you have in the delegate. Okay, we have read the instructor. We can also read the year. Let's do that. We can pass in year and year here. And we're going to read this as a number. We also want to read the course name. Let's look at how it is spelled here. Course name, I can copy this to improve on not getting the errors. So course name is going to be a string as well. I also want to read the attribute, whether or not it's hot. So I'm going to copy this, paste down here and say hot, because that's the name of the attribute, if I'm correct. Yes, it is. And we want to specify at hot here, and we want to read that as a string. And now we should have our model ready to be linked to a list view or a grid view, whatever you see fit. But before we do that, I want to look at the status. I want to show you a way to see what's going on when your model is reading the data from the XML file. We want to handle the onStatus changed signal handler. And this side, we are going to do something like this. Control A, Control I to align. We are basically defining a prefix that says XMLListModel. And we are saying if status equals ready, we print ready, and we show the count of the elements that we read from the XML file. If it is loading, we say that it is loading. If we have an error, we say that. And if it is null, we also say that. This is a good way to debug and see what is happening as your model is reading the data from your XML file. Now that we have the model, we can go down here, define a list view. This is going to be quick. ID is going to be mListView. Model is going to be XMLListModel ID. We want it to fill the parent, so we say nCourse fill parent. And we want to give it a nice delegate that we have prepared. Control A, Control I to align. And our delegate is nothing new to you as of now. We have a row that has two text components. One is going to say the instructor. And notice that we are using the same thing that we had in our XML roles here. So instructor here should match instructor here. And we have course name that matches course name here. We have year that matches year here. And we have hot that matches hot that we have here. And we are reading hot as an attribute because we have the @ symbol here. You should know that. And we are checking to see if it is hot. Okay, if it is hot, it's going to return true here. If it returns true, the text is going to be bold for the course name and the year. And if it is not hot, it's not going to be bold here. And we have a mouse area that shows whether we have a hot attribute and its value when we click on the item in the list view here. Okay, our application should be ready now, but there are a few things we forgot. If you go to the documentation for XMLListModel, you're going to see that to use this element, you need to import the module with the following line. We need to import that, so we're going to copy this and put that here to import this component here to be able to use it. And I noticed that we made a mistake here by putting these @ symbols here. We shouldn't have them here. Okay, so remove them. Again, I'm sorry for this. And we should be able to run our application. Make sure that you don't have any @ symbol here, and make sure that you have this XML list model imported. Run the application. Okay, you see that we have the names for the instructors, we have the name of the course and the year, and you see that the course for Math Cowboy is bolded because it has a hot attribute on it. Okay, this is the course here, this is the name, this is the year. If you look down, you see that we have another course that has a hot attribute, but because it is not true, we are not making it bold in what we have here. Okay, the course is by Lillian here, and it is not bold. And this is really how you read your data from an XML file, put it in an XML list model, and feed it to a list view. Now I want to try a few syntaxes that we have seen before. Another way you can query the elements, you can comment this out so that you have it. I'm going to say query and pass in double slashes and say course. And if I run, I should see the same thing. They are effectively the same thing. And you see that I have my data, and I am seeing my debug output. It is saying loading, and when it's ready, I know that I have 5 elements. And if you count what we have in the XML file, we have 1 course here, 2 courses, 3 courses, 4 courses, and 5 courses. Okay, this is what we are successfully reading. Let's go back to the QML file. And if I wanted to only retrieve the first course, we also saw this syntax. I can pass in brackets like this and pass in the index of the course that I want. If I run this, I am only going to read 1 course from the XML file. You see the number here, the count, and you see that it is only the course by Matt Cabo here. I can also specify the other courses. For example, I can pass in 2, and I am going to read the second course. Okay, we have the course here. This is all I had to say in this lecture. I hope you have a better idea of how you work with XML list model to read the data from the XML file. It is really easy, and the bulk of it is really to be able to work with these queries. The first query is in the XML list model here, and the second one is in the XML role that specifies whatever specific data that you want to get from the items that the first query returned. And if you want to learn more on these queries and the way you do that, you can come to the documentation. I think they have good examples on how you work with these things. You can go through these examples. They have an XML file, they have the query here, and they have XRole. You can look at this. And if you keep going down, you're going to see more examples of things you can do with those things. If you come to this location, they are going to tell you to see XML role query. Click on that. And if you keep going down, they're going to show you a link where you can go and read about the XPath specification, which is a standard that defines these things we are doing here in the queries. You're going to see everything about it. If you are in the mood for tutorials, you can come to this link here. This is one tutorial I found online that goes through the standard of XPath and how it works. If you need a refresher or an introduction to it, this is a good thing to look at. Okay, this is all I had to say in this lecture. In the next lecture, we're going to look at how you work with animations in Qt Quick. I'll see you there.